Charlie Chaplin, a name that instantly brings to mind the image of a small man, a bowler hat perched precariously on his head, a cane in hand, and that tiny, iconic mustache that became a symbol of a whole era. To millions across the globe, he was the master of laughter, the silent genius who could convey joy, sorrow, and even social criticism without uttering a single word. Yet behind the infectious smile and the playful tramp character, there was a life shaped by hardship, struggle, and a complexity that few ever saw. Born on April 16, 1889, in London, Chaplin entered a world where poverty was a constant companion and security was fleeting. His father, a musician and occasional performer, abandoned the family early on, leaving his mother, Hannah, to care for Charlie and his older brother Sidney under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Hannah herself struggled with mental illness, sometimes leaving her children to fend for themselves in the grim streets of London. Young Charlie's early years were marked by deprivation and exposure to the harsh realities of Victorian urban life. He spent periods in workhouses, experienced hunger firsthand, and witnessed the fragility of those around him. These experiences, painful as they were, became the foundation for his observational brilliance. He watched people closely, mimicking their mannerisms, voices, and quirks, learning to find humor even in suffering. In the music halls of London, where he began performing as a child, Chaplin absorbed the rhythms of comedy, the timing of slapstick, and the power of silent expression. Each stumble, gesture, and facial expression he perfected was born from years of close study of humanity under pressure, a survival mechanism turned into artistry. By the time he was a teenager, Chaplin was already treading the boards in music halls, earning modest pay but invaluable experience. His performances were raw, infused with energy, and displayed an instinctive understanding of timing and audience connection. It was during these formative years that Chaplin developed the core elements of what would become the Tramp, a character simultaneously naive and cunning, vulnerable yet resilient, capable of inspiring laughter while evoking empathy. But the early London streets had also taught him another lesson. The world is rarely kind to those who are different, talented, or ambitious. Poverty, illness, and societal neglect left marks not only on his body, but on his psyche, shaping a man who would later face fame, scrutiny, and scandal, with a mixture of charm, defiance, and resilience. Even as he began his ascent to international stardom, the duality of Chaplin's life was already apparent. On screen, he was the eternal optimist, the little man with a big heart who could turn the world's cruelty into comedy. Off-screen, he navigated a life full of instability, hardship, and the looming shadows of scandal and controversy that would follow him for decades. He was a man who had witnessed suffering intimately and transformed it into art, a man whose genius was inseparable from the struggles of his youth. And it was this very tension between innocence and cunning, between laughter and hardship, between the public persona and the private reality that would define not only his early years, but the entire trajectory of his remarkable, tumultuous life. As Chaplin's star rose in the roaring 1920s, he became more than just an entertainer. He became a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of cinema's transformative power. Audiences around the world flocked to see his films, from The Kid to The Gold Rush, marveling at how a silent man could make them laugh, cry, and feel deeply, all without a single word. Chaplin's genius lay not only in his impeccable timing and physical comedy, but in his uncanny ability to mirror the struggles, fears, and absurdities of everyday life. The Tramp, with his worn-out coat, oversized shoes, and hopeful gaze, was more than a character. He was a reflection of humanity itself, resilient, resourceful, and irrepressibly optimistic, even in the face of crushing adversity. Yet, as Chaplin's fame grew, so did the scrutiny and the controversies that shadowed him. his personal life became a magnet for scandal. He married 4 times, often to women decades younger than himself, and his relationships were sensationalized in newspapers and magazines worldwide. Headlines alternated between adoration and outrage, painting him as both a romantic genius and a morally questionable figure. Each affair and each marriage stirred public fascination, making Chaplin a man who was simultaneously idolized and vilified. Behind the laughter he inspired, whispers of impropriety and judgment followed him relentlessly, turning his private choices into public spectacle. But it wasn't just romance that attracted attention. Chaplin's films were laced with subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, political and social commentary. Modern Times critiqued the dehumanizing machinery of industrialization. The great dictator boldly mocked Hitler and Mussolini at a time when such daring could destroy careers. His art often challenged authority, critiqued social inequality, and shone a light on injustice, earning him both praise and powerful enemies. In the United States, during the height of the Red Scare, suspicion of communism clung to Chaplin like a shadow. Politicians, media outlets, and even government agencies scrutinized him relentlessly, dissecting his beliefs, his friendships, and even the subtext of his films. Chaplin's resilience was remarkable. Despite legal battles, paternity suits, and accusations of moral impropriety, he continued to work tirelessly, producing some of the most memorable films of the silent and early sound eras. Yet, the tension between his public adoration and private vilification intensified. By the late 1940s and early 1950s, the scrutiny reached a fever pitch. Authorities in the United States began investigating his political affiliations and his personal life, culminating in an atmosphere of suspicion and hostility that threatened his very presence in the country he had helped define as a cultural icon. Then, in a dramatic turn of events, the government effectively barred him from re-entering the United States in 1952 while he traveled to London, citing moral charges and political concerns. The man who had brought joy to millions, who had made laughter a universal language, suddenly found himself exiled from the nation that had made him a legend. This period of scrutiny and exile underscored the paradox of Chaplin's existence, a man adored for his creativity and humanity, yet persecuted for the same qualities that made him extraordinary. He was a genius who could entertain, enlighten, and challenge all at once, and the world, while eager to enjoy his art, often struggled to accept the complexity of the man behind the screen. Amidst the glitz of premieres, roaring applause, and Hollywood acclaim, Chaplin faced relentless intrusion into his private life, political suspicion, and a relentless campaign of vilification. It was this collision of public love and private torment, of laughter and scandal, that defined the middle years of Chaplin's life, years in which his genius was both celebrated and condemned, and in which he emerged as one of the most enigmatic and compelling figures of the 20th century. Exiled from the country that had made him a star, Charlie Chaplin settled in the serene landscapes of Switzerland, far from the flashing cameras and constant scrutiny of Hollywood. The contrast could not have been starker. Quiet lakes, snow-capped mountains, and the slow rhythm of European life replaced the relentless chaos of the movie industry. Yet even in exile, Chaplin remained restless, a man driven by the same relentless creative fire that had fueled his rise to global fame. He continued to make films, most notably Limelight, a deeply personal work reflecting both the fragility of fame and the inevitability of aging. In this film, Chaplin explored themes of decline, redemption, and the fleeting nature of success, subtly echoing the realities of his own life. A man who had once captivated millions, now navigating isolation and judgment. Despite the distance from Hollywood, Chaplin's influence was undiminished. Filmmakers across the world studied his technique, dissected his timing, and marveled at his ability to communicate profound emotion without dialogue. His genius was not simply in comedy, but in the universality of his expression, the humanity in his performances, and the subtle power of his social commentary. The exile, however, underscored the irony of his life. The very country that had celebrated him as a cultural icon had turned against him, revoking his re-entry permit and subjecting him to public vilification based on his private life and alleged political sympathies. For Chaplin, laughter had always been a shield, a way to survive, to connect, and to challenge the world. Yet now, even that laughter could not protect him from censure and exclusion. Time, however, has a way of reframing legends. In 1972, Chaplin returned to the United States to accept an honorary Academy Award, nearly 2 decades after his exile. The reception was extraordinary. As he walked onto the stage, the standing ovation lasted for minutes, tears glistening in his eyes, applause shaking the theater. The world that had once vilified him now celebrated him not just as the tramp, but as Charlie Chaplin, the visionary who had changed cinema forever. It was a rare, almost poetic reconciliation. The man who had been exiled, hunted, and misunderstood was finally honored, the triumph of his artistry undeniable. Yet Chaplin's legacy is more than awards and accolades. His life was a paradoxical blend of light and shadow. He was a man whose laughter could warm hearts, but whose personal life often sparked outrage. He was deeply private, yet endlessly observed, adored, yet scrutinized, brilliant, yet deeply flawed. Through The Tramp, he showed the world the beauty of resilience, the poignancy of vulnerability, and the power of hope in the face of adversity. Through his exile, he revealed the cost of genius, the fragility of public adoration, and the courage it takes to stay true to one's art and conscience.